It's a season where we are not only just singing joy to the world, but really the language is bombarding us with this is the happiest time of the year, the most joyous time of the year. It tells us that the kids are jingling their jingle bells and that we should be happy that the lights are shining. That clearly this is the happiest, most joyous time of the year. And those songs, those words, while well intended, they leave us with a lot of ambiguity. Thank you. Now I can't say it, it's in my head. Yeah. They leave us questioning where our place is. They leave us wondering why we cannot feel the joy. They leave us wondering what happens when we don't sense the very thing everybody else is talking about. You see, there's this weirdness about the word joy. We've actually, in our culture, turned it into an emotion, a feeling. Joy comes when all the good things are happening. And surely, even in our Christian lives, we are too blessed to be stressed, is what we say. And if we aren't feeling that way, then surely there is no joy. And so in this happiest time where people are telling us what we should feel, we are unsettled. There's some of us in this room that are walking through the life of first. There's grief that is lingering for those who are no longer at our tables. There is grief that has hollowed out a place in our hearts and our souls where we can no longer hear the laughter of the loved one. It's the reality that we are the last one of our generation, that our brothers and our sisters, they have all transitioned into the mighty kingdom. But here we are. And so the joy, these words, these feelings everyone is talking about, it is nowhere near our hearts. And for some of us, we sit in this space and we're tired because we look out at the world and it seems so easy for everyone else. Their job seems secure and ours seems as if we are barely holding on. What we are making is not enough. Inflation is such that our pennies are no longer rubbing together and we are barely surviving. And yet we are to be joyful. We are to enjoy the lights and feel the laughter. And there is no laughter to be held when we are barely hanging on. And some of us, we hear these words and we want to feel that joy. We want that emotion because all that we can do is to be shrouded underneath the comfort of our blankets because our depression or our anxiety is so high that we are trapped. It's not that we don't want to go. It's not that we don't want to be with people. It's that we physically cannot be with. And so we hear these words, we hear these songs, and it pulls us inward. It makes us believe that there is something wrong with us, that we are missing something. In this happiest time, in this joyous time, we do not feel that emotion. And the interesting thing is that our scriptures are filled with moments such as this. Isaiah is talking to a people that are broken. Everything that they know, everything that they've known has been taken away in this time in their history. Everything. And they don't see any end in sight. We don't really see any end in sight, do we either? They're stuck. They're tired and weary, and they are broken. And in these words that Isaiah is painting for them, he doesn't talk about joy as an emotion. In this thin line, he doesn't say that it's a feeling. No, Isaiah paints a very different picture of what joy is and where joy comes from. Joy is found in transition. Joy is not a feeling, it is not an emotion. For Isaiah, joy is the acknowledgement that there is a revival, that there is a revived life within every single one of us. He paints this picture that says, you know, in the deepest, darkest, hardest times, in the grainy sands, when there seems to be no water in sight, there is this little sprig that comes rising forth. There is this beautiful little flower that has been given just enough water. It's in that acknowledgement. It's in that seeing and that knowing that when we point to the transition of new life, that is the joy. That out of the depths of nothing can come something beautiful. And the transition isn't easy. The transition, he says, that the blind can then see. That the places of uncertainty, when they slowly give way to a thin line of being able to see the next step or the next rock in the path, that acknowledgement that life is happening, that the revival of life is coming, that when we can claim that is joy. Or when the woundedness turns to healing. That finally the scab stops hurting and bleeding, and ever so gently it begins to heal. It doesn't mean that the scar's not there, but it means that the pain is not as profound. And it's in that moment of transition, in that change, in that process, that we claim joy. You see, joy is an acknowledgement of God's presence, of the everyday small things that revive us, that bring that one seed of holiness. And for us, that transition, those moments of joy, it's what happens when the tears of grief, those tears of anger and dismay and frustration of being alone and being left on this side without the ones that we love. When those tears, months later, when those tears become tears of memories of being able to hear that loved one's voice, or there's a specific smell that happens and you're caught right back and you can remember and you think of something that you shared together. The acknowledgement of, oh, that is life. That's what Isaiah is talking about. That's the joy, the acknowledgement that God is present. And for those of us who have been shrouded in the bleak midwinter nights, and every day seems like it's a struggle to come out from the cocoon of the blankets, the moment that we are able to get up and get dressed and simply be in our small group, or have lunch or coffee, or even pick up the phone. In that small transition, that acknowledgement of the sliver of life, of something being brought into our lives, something restorative happening, that when we can acknowledge that transition, that is called joy. Even if it's just for a moment. Or when we look around and our children, whether they're 5 or 10 or 40, and the worries and the heartache that we had last year, the moments where they struggled, the job that fell through, the grandchild that was not born. When we come to a place where we can say and we can acknowledge that my child is healthy, that they're healthier, stronger than they were 5 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. And that is not about weight. That is not about a body image. That is about mentally and spiritually healthy. And sometimes it is physical. But you see, in that transition, it's that transition from that hopelessness to that sense of revival of life. And when we acknowledge, even in this very smallest, minute movement, that is called joy. That is called rejoicing. That is called being able to sing to God with all of our hearts. And you see, when we begin and are at a point where those small things begin to tweak in us, it's we realize that joy doesn't stand alone. God has come to us. We are the innkeepers, and God has been knocking at our doors. And God asked us to house the holiness of hope. The hope that says when the world is crushing in, when the world says I am not alive, when the world says I am not present, when the world says you shouldn't do or you can't do, when we make room for God in our hearts, our lives, our souls, when we house the holiness of hope and we sustain it and we put God's promise over and over, when we say it and we proclaim it and we give it to others, our own hopelessness becomes hope. Our hope then leads into this making room for peace. And it's not about anybody else. It's not about pointing the fingers or blaming anybody else. It's not about the judgment. It's not about our personal preference, but it's really about the song we sing when we say, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. And the peace comes because we've made room for God not to refine somebody else, but to refine us, take our rough edges and smooth them, to make us people who are not afraid to be collaborative, to be communicative, to make us people that don't abuse power. You see, when we are refined, it's then that we become the peace. And so hope leads into peace. And this peace of knowing ourselves and becoming all that God has asked us to be and letting God forge us in the fire. It then leads us to the way to see the transition, the small, tiny moments where once there was death, there is life. Where there is a desert in our soul, there is water. And where we cannot see and where we are weak, we are made strong. Hope, peace, and joy. We are being called to house these three things in our lives. Are we making room for them? Are we making room for the transitions of noticing the revival and the small moments in which God comes to us to revive our lives? Are we housing the holy this season? Let us pray.